Welcome to part 3 of Unit 8, which is clinical psychology. Today what we're going to be talking about is schizophrenia. So schizophrenia is a type of psychotic disorder. There's actually kind of a broader umbrella of psychotic disorders, and schizophrenia is just one of them. But it's one that we're going to see a little bit more focus on, so we're going to focus on it specifically here. So what psychotic disorders are a group of disorders that are marked by kind of 3 specific pieces. Irrational ideas, distorted perceptions, and a loss of contact with reality. So as we kind of get through, we'll see these different pieces. But again, that's what we expect to see in a psychotic disorder. Again, irrational ideas, distorted perceptions, and a loss of contact with reality. Now, schizophrenia specifically is going to be characterized by delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech, and or diminished or inappropriate emotional expression. So any or all of these kind of different pieces could be there. I think this is really important because a lot of times we think of people with schizophrenia as only having hallucinations. It's kind of like the big thing that people usually think about is that everybody with schizophrenia has hallucinations, and that's actually not the reality. You can kind of have a variety of different symptoms, but again, they're all going to be kind of connecting to this, distortion of your perceptions, of your loss of contact with reality, or having these irrational ideas. So they're all kind of separating you from what's actually happening, what you're actually experiencing. So let's kind of break these down a little bit. So schizophrenia, generally speaking, we can kind of think about it as having 2 different types of symptoms. We can have positive symptoms and negative symptoms. Positive symptoms are things that are going to be added in to your experience that aren't there. Negative symptoms are going to be things that we are not showing or not perceiving. So hallucinations, first we're going to talk about these disturbed perceptions and beliefs. So disturbed perceptions is going to refer to hallucinations. Beliefs is going to refer to delusions. So hallucinations are kind of a big example of positive symptoms that we see when we look at schizophrenia. So hallucinations are false sensory experiences. So they literally see, feel, taste, or smell things that are not actually there. And again, it can be any of these different senses. It can be really any of your senses that you are just literally experiencing something that's not actually happening. Your brain is firing for whatever reason, but there isn't a stimuli that should be causing those different parts of your brain to be firing. On the other hand, we also have delusions. So delusions are disturbed beliefs. So delusions is where we have a false belief. 2 of kind of the biggest ones that we see are the delusion of persecution or the delusion of grandeur, or we see sometimes them together. And this is basically the idea, if someone has a delusion of persecution, they feel that they are being persecuted even when they aren't, right? They feel like maybe they're being watched, or people are following them or chasing them or after them, right? That would be a delusion of persecution. Of grandeur is this idea that you are incredibly important or influential, or you're going to make a giant impact on the world. And you can kind of see how these 2 things might go together, right? If I have, I can have both of these, where I believe that I'm really important, and so because of that, the world is watching me or the government is watching me, and I have these kind of false beliefs that these things are happening. And again, these are just things that can accompany not just schizophrenia, but other psychotic disorders as well. Now, we also have other types of symptoms that we usually don't really think about when we think about schizophrenia. One of the big ones is what is called disorganized speech. So disorganized speech can come in a lot of different ways. One way that we can see it is what is called word salad, which is basically where the people, they're able to speak, and in their head they may even be making sense about what they're saying, but when they're actually speaking, it's just a bunch of random words, right? So the quote up there, liberationary movement with a view to the widening of the horizon will ergo extort some wit in lectures. That quote is actually from a patient with schizophrenia, right? So you can see how they're saying words, but none of the words go together. It's just kind of like a random jumble of words that aren't actually creating meaning at the end. We can also see one of our big negative symptoms, which is diminished or inappropriate emotions. So diminished emotions, where we would have what is called a flat affect, which is basically where there's like no emotion, right? So you might be talking to them and you might be expressing some sort of kind of emotional feeling, whether it's happiness or sadness, and they are just kind of completely flat. They're not expressing either or they can talk about being sad or being really happy, but again, they're just not showing any of that emotion. We can also have where emotions will be shown inappropriately. So an example could be like, you're discussing someone's passing, or you're at a funeral, and they might start laughing really, really hard or laughing hysterically, right? It's where we're having emotions that are being presented or shown in inappropriate ways, places they shouldn't show up. We also will see that a lot of times with schizophrenia, these people will struggle to read and understand other people's emotions. So not only may they struggle to express their own or not express their own at all, they also may struggle to, read the emotions in another person. So there's two main types of schizophrenia. We have chronic schizophrenia and acute schizophrenia. So chronic schizophrenia is we're going to basically be looking at schizophrenia where symptoms are going to appear by late adolescence, so pretty early in life, right? And about your like high teens into your 20s or 30s, right? Late adolescence or early adulthood. So we're going to start to see symptoms pretty early on. As people age, we expect to see their psychotic episodes lasting longer and their recovery periods shortening. So when we're talking about a psychotic episode, when someone has schizophrenia, let's say they have hallucinations, for example. Generally speaking, they're not going to be hallucinating 24/7. It's not like they're just constantly in a state of hallucination, or they're not constantly experiencing hallucinations. They have like episodes where they'll go through periods of time where they'll be hallucinating or they'll have these delusions or whatever. And then they have what are called recovery periods, which are basically chunks in between where they're pretty much normal, right? They don't have any of the symptoms, or at least not as bad as the major symptoms that they would normally have during a psychotic period or episode, sorry. So what we see actually with chronic schizophrenia is that as they age, as they get older and older, those psychotic episodes tend to get longer and longer, and the recovery periods tend to get shorter and shorter, right? So it kind of separates them further and further and further away from reality. Now, we also see, though, that people with chronic schizophrenia are more likely to have negative symptoms and are less likely to recover. So if when we don't see something like a hallucination, for example, we're more likely to see people with chronic schizophrenia not have, for example, hallucinations. They may have more of the negative symptoms like a flat affect, right, as opposed to maybe hallucinations. Again, the other piece with chronic schizophrenia is that these people are less likely to recover from it. It's pretty much, the most likely what we're going to see is it continue to progress and progress and progress until it's pretty much all encompassing, and it kind of takes over their life. Acute schizophrenia is a little bit different. So acute schizophrenia can actually begin at any age, and oftentimes it's in response to some sort of event. So there's a traumatic event, right? You can think about what we talked about, PTSD. Some sort of traumatic event happens, and for whatever reason, it basically causes schizophrenia, this acute schizophrenia. Now, people with acute schizophrenia are more likely to have the positive symptoms. They're more likely to have things like hallucinations, but they're also more likely to recover. So we can kind of see how there's these two kind of general types that function a little bit differently and even have different causes, really. So some kind of basic things about understanding schizophrenia. So schizophrenia is one of our disorders that is heavily based in biology, right? There's a lot of biology and chemistry to look at when we're talking about schizophrenia. So for one example, an overactivity of dopamine may actually be what's causing positive symptoms, where basically someone who has, hallucinations, for example, it might be basically that their dopamine is overreacting, and because of that, it's causing their brain, their neurons to fire. And obviously when our neurons fire, that's as if it's experiencing some sort of stimuli. So these neurons fire, it basically tells our brain that there's stimuli there that it's not, and then we experience these hallucinations. So that could be a reason why, or one cause of what's going on. We do also see abnormal brain activity in people with schizophrenia, like decreased frontal lobe or increased thalamus or amygdala, functions going on, activities going on. We can see sometimes abnormal brain structures, like smaller than normal cortex, hippocampus, corpus callosum, or thalamus. So again, you're seeing just abnormalities in the brain itself, as well as how active it's actually being. We also know that things like prenatal damage can cause or could be connected with schizophrenia. So things like famine, low birth weight, or oxygen deprivation, may basically cause or set up someone to have schizophrenia. And then we also know that rates increase if a parent or sibling has schizophrenia. So I've kind of mentioned before that schizophrenia is one of our disorders that does seem to have at least some level of genetic link. And this is kind of where that's coming from, is that if a parent or a sibling has schizophrenia, it increases the chances that you will also have schizophrenia. So we can kind of see how you would approach this a little bit differently, right? And again, we'll get into kind of treatments a little bit later in this course. But it's important to kind of think about, okay, as we look at these different disorders, what really separates them, right? What makes this disorder look different than the other disorders? So one of the big things about schizophrenia, as we look at it, it's very much chemically based. It's very much biologically based. It's very much neurobiology and neuroscience. So, when we talk about treatments, that's where we're going to start kind of fundamentally focusing our treatment plans, right? And so we'll kind of see that a little bit later on. So that's it. It's a pretty short little section here. Again, take a few moments, do a summary, and I'll see you guys next time.